Good morning. Good morning, Bones. Today we're going to talk about natural selection. Right? We've started talking about evolution, which is how organisms change over millions of years. Okay, and they pass down their favorable characteristics that help them survive in the environment. The question is, how exactly does this happen? Okay, how exactly does nature select who's going to live in the environment and who's going to die off? Okay, and this concept was come up by a scientist named Charles Darwin, who sailed across the oceans on a boat called the Beagle. All right, and he studied and he looked at all organisms in all different parts of the world, and he came up with this idea of natural selection, how nature selects who's going to survive and who's going to die off based on their characteristics and how well adapted they are to the environment. Okay, some of you may have heard this natural selection term as called survival of the fittest. Okay, those that are the most fit to survive will. Those that are not, nature is going to selectively have them end up dying off. So Charles Darwin saw this in his studies as he was traveling across the world. Okay, so let's take a look at exactly what natural selection is. You can see all these organisms fighting with each other in order to survive and in order to reproduce. So let's take a look. There are five main principles to the theory of natural selection. Okay, there's five of them. The first one is overproduction. Okay, what this means is that more organisms are born than can possibly survive. Okay, you can see the locust pictures on the left. You can see the sea turtles on the right. I'll talk about the sea turtles. That is too many sea turtles to survive. There are too many predators around those sea turtles for all of them to survive. Now, nature knows this. So nature wants to pick the fastest, strongest baby sea turtles. So after they're born, there's a race in order for them to go to the safety of the ocean. Those that are fast enough, smart enough, strong enough in order to get to the ocean safely are going to make it. They're going to continue to live. Those that get confused, that are a little slower, predators are going to come pick them off, and they're going to end up being eaten by a predator, and they're going to die off. This is one way nature decided the faster, quicker, stronger sea turtles are going to live longer, and while the weaker ones are not. Okay, it's not a really nice process. It is a cutthroat process where there are too many organisms that are born that can possibly survive. So nature is going to choose the strong ones to survive, and the weaker ones are going to die off, and that's just the way it's going to be. Now, what does overproduction cause? Overproduction causes competition. Okay, competition for resources. There are a limited number of resources here on the earth. Okay, there's a limited amount of food, water, living space. We are competing for all of that, even mates. All right, you can see these two bears here. Okay, what are they competing for? What do you think? They could be competing for food. They can be competing for living space. But one of those bears is going to outcompete the other. Okay, and it's going to be able to live in its environment and continue to fish and continue to reproduce, while the other bear is going to have to go find somewhere else to do it, or is going to die off. Okay, so competition. It's just like sports. You're going to have a winner in a game. You're going to have a loser in a game. The winner gets to move on and live longer life. The loser, it's going to be more difficult. Now, grass. What could grass be competing for? I don't get it. What could plants be competing for? Plants compete for a lot of stuff. They compete for sunlight. They compete for water. They compete for minerals and nutrients in the soil. So even plants are competing for each other. You'll see some plants that are exposed to more sunlight grow better because they're exposed to more sunlight and they can undergo photosynthesis more easily than plants that are hidden in shade, and they have more competition for sunlight. So this competition does not only blend itself to animals and animals, it also blends itself to plant life here on this earth. So competition is a part of nature. Okay, those that are better at competing are going to survive longer, reproduce more, and their favorable characteristics that allow them to compete are going to be passed on to future generations. Again, this is nature's way of selecting who's going to live and who's not. Which brings us to concept number 3. Survival of the fittest. Okay? Survival of the fittest is based on individuals who survive in the environment that have the best variations, the best adaptations in order to survive in that environment. For instance, the giraffe. Okay? Giraffes used to not have a long neck. Giraffes used to be very short. They didn't have a long neck. All right? But what was happening is they were getting outcompeted for food. Okay? So they were eating all of the brush and plant life that it was lower to the ground. But other organisms, not as tall as giraffe, were also eating those bushes and shrubs and shorter plant life. Well, what started happening was that we noticed giraffes with a little bit longer of a neck were able to reach higher on a tree and get more food. So they were living longer, okay, and reproducing more. Now, what happens if you have two tall parents? If you have two tall parents and then you're born, chances are you're going to be tall. The same thing started happening with giraffe necks. Okay, so two giraffes with a little bit longer neck who are eating food on a little bit higher part of a tree have all the food they want. They're living a little bit longer, they reproduce with each other, and their offspring are born with long necks. When this happens over millions and millions of years, what happens is the neck of the giraffe grew, okay? Because it is a favorable characteristic. They are more fit to survive in the environment that they were given, okay? So over the course of millions of years, giraffes have evolved into having long necks. Okay, this is what's known as survival of the fittest, who has the best adaptations, okay, in order to survive the longest, in order to reproduce the most, and pass those characteristics on to future generations. Okay, natural selection. Nature is deciding who lives and owns who doesn't. Oops. Now, like we said, the longer you live, the more you reproduce, okay? The best adapted individuals are going to be able to reproduce more because they are living longer. Just look at this horse here, okay? You can look at these horse hooves. They've changed over the years. Horses weren't like millions of years ago, didn't look the way they do today, okay? They looked small, almost like a little Weasley thing. And then they slowly grew. Their hooves changed, because this was allowing them to survive in the environment. It was allowing them to move across the land better, to find more resources to live, find more resources to eat, okay? And the changing hoof allowed them to move more efficiently across the land, thus them reproducing more and passing those favorable traits down to their offspring. Over the course of the millions of years, we now have the horses that we do today. And in the future, they're going to look different as well. You can just see, even the human race, we're growing taller every single day because nature is selecting the human species to have advantages when we tend to be taller at the moment. Could it change with a changing environment? Sure. But right now, even the human species is getting taller, just like you can see in the picture of the horse. So again, the better adapted you are at the environment, the longer you're going to live, because you're going to outcompete everybody. You're going to outsurvive everybody because you are fitter in the environment. Then you are going to be able to reproduce more. And the more you reproduce, the more those favorable characteristics in nature are passed on to future generations. Brings us to concept number 5, speciation. Okay. This is what Charles Darwin is famous for, is going down to the Galapagos Islands where he found tortoises among the different islands of the Galapagos. Now, speciation is over time a new species may evolve from a common ancestor. Now, we have 2 tortoise pictures here. And what Darwin noticed was some of the tortoises on the island had shorter necks and were a darker color. Other tortoises, part of the same island group, had longer necks and a brighter color, as you can see in the pictures. So Charles Darwin asked the natives at the time, why is this? How do you know this turtle comes from this island? Why does this tortoise come from this island? How do you guys know all this? And he says, well, the darker tortoises with the shorter necks, the rocks in the environment are that color. So over millions of years, those tortoises with the darker shell color were blending into their environment. They were camouflaging themselves in order to survive. The food they had to eat was also very low to the ground. They never needed to grow longer necks. While the tortoise that you see at the bottom, the environment, the dirt, the land, was more of that brownish color. And the vegetation that they could eat was a little higher up a little higher up off the ground. So only the tortoises that were surviving were the ones that were born with longer necks. And if they were born with longer necks, they were reproduced and their offspring had a little bit longer necks. Charles Darwin was floored by this, that you could have different species, okay, or you could have different organisms coming from a common ancestor that, because of their environment, because of where they're living, start to change and start to go through speciation from a common ancestor. Okay? So this is all nature's way of selecting who is going to survive and who is going to die off. All developed by Charles Darwin.